Because it's been so long since I've seen you in person.
It's been too long.
I know. Maybe this, like, you think we'll get back together this winter?
I never broke up with you.
Oh, true. We did not break up. But I'm saying it's been a long distance relationship for the past year.
It has been. It has been. It was the pandemic pause. It's like I love you, but I can't see you.
And I feel like the last time I saw you, I was in such a bad mood. I was like crying.
Yeah, but there was good reason for that. Yeah. Whenever you cry, just know that there's always a good reason. Yeah. And so just let it.
But I want to see you in my positive aura. You know what I mean? Like in the glow of things. It's just been far too long.
I'm here for all of it.
All right, well, we are now live in the book club. We'll see if anybody joins in as we discuss part 3 of Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. And with me is Dr. Orton. Did I say your last? You know, I've never said your last name.
It's TwoFeathers Orton.
Okay, the full last name is TwoFeathers Orton.
Yeah, and I think it depends regionally on where you're from. Like some people over enunciate the at the end, like Orton, and I don't particularly know the historical. I mean, I know the historical origins of that surname, but I don't know how it was enunciated. Believe it or not, my family just says Orton.
Okay, as long as we're pronouncing it similar to the family, we're all good. I was actually this is random, but like I just finished watching Underground by Barry Jenkins. So I was watching something else related to that because I was like, oh, I'm going to do a review about it. And it was talking about Black people from Nova Scotia.
Black people from?
Nova Scotia, Canada.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, oh. This morning, I was doing some research on Black Canadians from Nova Scotia. And they were all like, well, yeah, we're like the original Black people, and so we're Black and Indigenous. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there's, you know, I guess more in the Indigenous community, there's a lot more discussion on what it means to be Indigenous, because Indigenous is a spectrum. You know, you have people who know their ancestral history who are Black and Indigenous, people who are Asian and Indigenous, they're white and Indigenous. You know, it's not a monolith, despite like, you know, people want to receive as like, oh, we all look the same. I mean, I am multi-tribal in my inheritance myself, and that's actually far more common than people who are just pure. I mean, let's be honest, like who's actually pure at this point in time? I mean, as a scientist, as a data scientist who's looked at genetics, I mean, let's not go there.
Yeah.
Let's just say there's no such thing.
Okay.
And that I think we should all be embracing our whole identities at this point. I think that's what the decolonization movement is about, is decolonizing our mind. The way that we think about our inheritance.
Very complicated.
It is, but you know, the Indigenous communities have suffered from colonial after effects for generations. We have colorism in our community. We have, you know, toxic mindset towards blood quantum. Even the whole call out culture that's now pervasive is seeping its way into how we interact with each other, which is there's no good end to that. So, but yes, there are Black Indigenous Canadians. There are Indigenous Asian Canadians. There's all sorts of varieties. We have lots of swirls.
Yes. All right, so let's get into the book. We're doing part 3. Kai is very prepared. She sent me a Google Doc. I was like, girl, you ain't have to. We was just going to do it. You know what I mean? We just go with the flow.
That's the former professor in me. You know, it's like, yeah, I have to.
I know. You got me together.
Questions. So what was that? At some point, I got fatalistic, and I was like, all right, this is all I got.
Wait, because what was it when you were helping me with my PhD application, and we were using Airtable?
Yes.
And I'm like, that's the data person. In fact, that was very helpful. Like,
I have to document like all the details. Like, I have to be prepared. I'm an over preparer.
See, my mind doesn't work like that. I need a person like you in my life to like organize the structure.
I want everybody. I want that to be my epitaph. You know, I was needed in different people's lives.
You
Winning.
are your best thing. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna pull up to the syllabus. We are on page in the PDF 34. Okay. And I'm just gonna read the pulled quote. And we'll start from there. And then if there's any particular themes that you want to talk about from this and relate back to your own experiences, your own understanding of the vastness of Indigenous culture, we don't have to stay on the syllabus. The syllabus is just a guideline to help keep things moving.
Okay.
But I hope you all have gone and gotten your syllabus, because this is a really, like, the questions are, they can be a little intense, but it's a really close reading, as in it really gets into the granular aspects of the book and really helps you kind of extrapolate some of the themes that deal with, you know, capitalism, imperialism, and racial hierarchies and classism and all the isms. But the quote is from page 277 of the book. And it says, "I was always a woman," Feiyu said. "I just needed some time to become who I am." Are non-binary genders in Tova treated with taboo to the degree they are in Koyakola? Can you compare the ways in which gender non-conforming people are treated in the Meridian to contemporary Western or non-Western society? That is a heavy question.
It is a heavy question. And you know, so what's interesting about how Rebecca Roanhorse presented this, like, this is like one of the first characters where we see someone sort of react, besides Serapio, to their gender identity. And, you know, so Okoa, first of all, it's like he wakes up naked, right? And he's been injured, he wakes up naked. And then he meets Feo's after he's like sort of up and regained his sensibilities. And Feo is very gracious, right? She, you know, she says like, "Oh, you don't remember me." And, you know, I thought what was the reason I liked Okoa, because it's like, otherwise he was sort of like a nonplussed character, but like this is part of, I think, his character development, is he has this moment where he's like, "Oh, do I know you?" And I do that all the time, right? And then I always feel like I need to fake it. Who does what like everyone you wish in your life would do when you don't recognize them. And they just tell you, like, here is who I am. Here's our history together. You know, and she says, you know, we used to play together when we were boys. And so he immediately gets this moment where it's like a gift of grace, right? It's like, you're looking at me now, but your memories are associated with playing with me as a boy. And so you just immediately love Feiyu, right? Because you're like, why is that so hard? Like in the office, you know, like, why can't people just do that? Like, we met at the such and such conference. So Feiyu does this. And instead of Okoa having like a flip out or anything, he just sort of sits with it. Mm-hmm. And it jogs his memory. And I thought that that was like both graceful of her, but I think it also gives us a hint that at least in Tova, that type of thing, whatever that is, gender fluidity, a binary, non-conforming, that's at least not shocking, right? Mm-hmm. You know, we first get the impression of what people think of that with Shiala as she's arrested in jail for having spent a night with a married woman. And so you get this feeling that like, oh, you know, it's very taboo there. But at least in Tova, if that's his reaction, and then also there at this convening where all of the people are there and no one's snickering, or at least it's not described. So you get this impression that at least Tova is much more open-minded. Tovans are much more open-minded. And even Okoa as a man is much more open-minded and sort of accepts it. But I feel like, obviously the Teeks, they're probably the most open-minded of all, right? They're just like, you know,
my favorite.
Women are sacred. Women are awesome. I think I'm Teek. And then you go everywhere else and you have this like, mishmash of what society deems is normal or not. And so based on like Okoa's reaction, I would say like Tova's probably like second under the Teaks in terms of their open-mindedness.
I mean, I think because a lot of the questions tend to contrast Coca Cola from Tova, and I think like the book's commentary kind of positions Coca Cola as like a more Keynesian capitalistic society, right? So like there's private wealth that is held by people, and like anyone has access to that private wealth. It's just about who can conquer, who can dominate, who can accumulate.
Right.
And in Tova, you still have a hierarchy, but the hierarchy is sort of ordained. And then because of proximity to land, you then have, you gotta have more natural occurring hierarchies, right? So it's not necessarily a purely capitalistic society. It kind of burgeons, and it's also not a democracy though either. It's sort of, I would have to get more into economic theory, right? Like, what are the different types of capitalism? What are the different types of socialism? But it kind
Yeah,
of it's somewhere in between that space. Like
for sure.
they don't have like a carceral state, right? So the punishment is either banishment or reparative, right? You pay. You
Right.
pay it's a restitutional process, or you are kicked out of the community process. Um, there isn't any holding people in jail and long term punishment. But who's to say that that's
Right.
necessarily
There's also this weird, like, feels like urban versus rural sort of dynamic that you get the vibe. And I say that because, like, Tova's, there's a separate map for it, which feels like what we do in like today's culture, where it's like this is the state, and then here is Chicago, or here is Denver, or here is Boston, because it's just much more complex in its infrastructure and the mapping, and so you sort of get that sense that that's true. But it mostly comes out when you think about Serapio, right? Serapio clearly was not raised in Tova, but his mother was Tovan. She's a Crow, and particularly when he's introduced to Poage. And maybe it's because he has also been blinded and hasn't relied on using visuals as a cue for identifying someone, right? Serapio can't, because he can't see in that way. But when Poage just introduces themselves as having a third gender, Serapio, Rebecca doesn't provide any like mental commentary on how he's receiving that information, right? And it's sort of so pure, and part of me, because I come from a matriarchal culture, I want to believe that Saya, Serapio's mother, must have imbued in him some of the Crow ways of thinking, some of the Tovan ways of thinking. And it's clear his dad's super conservative. It's clear everyone else around him is conservative. And so it does feel a little bit like this urban, rural, Tova has all of the expats and people from other places, right?
But I wouldn't even say Coca-Cola is rural though. Coca-Cola is very much
no. But I'm comparing it to the urban versus rural in like our society.
Well, yeah,
but
I think in our society, it's urban versus lakeshore. Like there's Chicago and then there's Lakeshore. You know what I mean? Like there's people that live on the lake, and they kind of live like you're like 15 miles outside of the city, and they have like this pseudo. And is it really rural? No, they have like this sort of holding on.
Well, I would say homogeneous. There's like heterogeneous society versus homogeneous society, where everybody sort of thinks similarly. And Tova's just a hot mess of everything, right? Even as they're parading through the neighborhoods, they're like, we have different expectations of each one of these areas because, so yeah, like when I think of the different regions, and I'm glad I have like the audiobook and the book. I was glad that I could see this map and this other map, of Tova, because I was like, what are we talking about here? How far did they travel? Where are these people from?
No, the visual. I think everyone who's really enjoyed the book has done the same thing, where they do the audio book and the physical book, because you both.
And I've never done that before.
But it's super helpful, right? I'm trying to think about what about the audiobook makes his impact so valuable. I guess because it's read in different voices. There's 4 different voices that read through the audiobook.
One
Um
of them I didn't like.
who didn't you like?
There was one of the women, the
Oh.
way she, the way she became Abba was like super annoying. I mean, Abba was also my least favorite character, but
I mean, but Abba was annoying, though. Like,
I know, but it's like that. It was just the little bit extra that I like couldn't handle. So I often turned it off then and like read the book.
I like read half the book, got the audiobook. I did most of the Okoye chapters I listened to on the audiobook. And then went back because I was like, this audiobook is also slower than I read. So like I need to like speed through this.
Interesting.
But I wanted to hear some of the explanation. Like I thought the audiobook, because it's like some of the scenes are just so magical and mystical. Like when they're describing the Teak people, I wanted to hear that. Because
Yeah,
sometimes reading things in my own voice, I'll skip over important notes, and the audiobook will add inflection and add tonation to heighten the importance of a particular scene. So there are certain sections of the book that I particularly went back to listen to because I knew they were important. But
I always paused it at the opening of each chapter because I loved those
epigraphs.
Yeah. That.
We're gonna move down to page 37 on the syllabus. And pull the quote from page 297. Best we stick to sacrificing people the old ways with wars and famine and despot rulers. Does this acknowledgement that religious and political customs are essentially indistinguishable justify radical action against an oppressive structure? Samantha really did the damn thing on this syllabus, I must say. I'm reading this as if I didn't edit this. I actually was very involved in the production of this syllabus, but all credit goes to Samantha, who did a very good job. And this is actually a scene between. I'm trying to find where the quote is from
Poage
Saya.
and Serapio.
Yeah.
And can I say Poage, if not Saya, Poage is my favorite character, and I know they're a minor character.
But wasn't he so harsh? They were harsh. I mean, I was judging.
Poage was no. Poage was not, and I'll if I'm allowed the opportunity, I'll tell you why I think Poage is the most magical person in the book.
Okay.
First, I'll try to respond to the question, which was, does this acknowledgement that religious and political customs are essentially indistinguishable and justify radical action against the oppressive structure? So this is something that Poage says to Serapio as he's telling the story about Saya, his mother, right? He says this, and this is how Serapio is learning about his mother coming up with a plan to essentially resurrect a dead god. And when he says this, I literally dropped the book and was like, what the actual, like, seriously? Because the way you read it, the way it's narrated, it's just so like, yeah, and then we just decided to like make a baby so that we could kill you later. I mean, it was just so like, honestly, like earth-shattering for me, because I thought, like, what is wrong with this person, right? Have they forgot to take in the kindness multivitamin? Have they forgotten to take the, get a clue, don't say it like that, juice? It was really like shocking to me. And so they make this statement, and then they also say, like, Serapio says something like it's dangerous to do that, right? Because Poage says it's too powerful for humans, and then Serapio says it's dangerous, and then his retort is that it's powerful, it's too powerful for humans, and that's somehow the justification that everyone shouldn't do it, right? That somehow this vengeance or this retaliation, this plan to attack in a particular way, it belongs to a minority that either will hold themselves accountable or who are thoughtful enough in their approach. And I personally felt really conflicted in understanding how I felt about this, in part because I already love Serapio, right? At this point, he's like super gentle, he's lonely, but he's also determined to do his best to fulfill this dream that his mom had. And so I've already, at this stage of the book, I've already accepted, okay, the guy is probably going to die, or that's the plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, and that's what Poage is telling him. And yet I realize that I already need to get over that, because Serapio receives this with much the same reception that Poage is delivering this like incredibly insensitive and brutal news, right? He's just like sort of like, yeah, so my mom came up with this plan to resurrect a god. You guys did some blood magic. Okay. And so you feel like you need to follow Serapio, like if you want to be his ally. And at this point, I think that's really what we're trying to do, is like we're cheering for him, but we're also like, but dude. And so like at this moment in the story, what resonated with me most is how timely it is for where underserved communities are, communities of color are now, with so much awareness of atrocities that have been historically committed, and now we're like living in this moment. So you have all sorts of movements, Black Lives Movement, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous movement for the Indigenous community, the Stop Asian Hate. You have all of these movements that are happening like at the same time. And then we have, this, like I had this feeling of like, okay, no more. Like it's enough to know like what his mom was doing, but now that we know like the intention, it wasn't just that his mom was like, received a vision and that this was like, it's like there were like 4 people co-conspiring with her and this Lord Balaam, and it's like all of these people set this into motion. And I feel like you want to relate to these people, but there's so much pain behind all of their stories. And so like when Poage, when I read the question, I immediately thought back to how I felt in that moment where it was the first time that I dropped the book and I was like, okay, someone needs to give these people like a kindness vitamin, because this is not how you tell someone like, by the way, your mother always planned to kill you.
Like, I think Serapio was kind of prepared for this moment though. After
he was, and that's why I said like I had to get on board to keep reading. I had to be like, okay,
if he's good, we good.
Thing. Okay, this is what you want to do. And I think Shiala went through that as well, right?
Yeah. We get like a pseudo love story in here with Shiala. I mean, it kind of comes back around in the end though, because she definitely has, I think she has like a huge influence on Serapio, obviously. But like they all kind of had to come to an understanding like after his training that he went through back in Koyakola, that he was prepared. I mean, he went through some pretty traumatic stuff to get him to that point, but like, I think also in order for Serapio to kind of survive, he had to believe in his mission.
Yes. I mean, I think the big moment for me was, we learn about this conversation with Poage after we see him sort of imbued with his dark power. And you realize that his dark power comes from all of these moments of training and preparation, but also that we think of him as this sweet, gentle soul that everything happened to. And you realize when the crows are not being fed from his hand, that he is an agent of tremendous power, but that he has control over it. Like, it's right, he's not out of control. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's decisive and intentional when he does it. But that also he's learned the lesson that none of the rest of us have in life, which is like self-care. So it's like when he's pushed to his limits, he's like, okay, I'm gonna back off now. Or
the solace.
Kissing you and making out with you right now and having you on top of me. This is really nice, but you know what?
Let's give us some space.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna move on.
So you have to respect that. You have to respect.
Yeah. I mean, in the syllabus, they do note that there's several characters that are identified as Bayaki, a third gender, which seems to be accepted in Toba, but unlikely it would have been accepted in other cities. But we're gonna move on to Narampa, and on page 39 of the syllabus, the quote is from page 324. Because you're not sky made, no matter how hard you try, you can't quite wash that dry earth stink off your skin, can you, sister? This is so mean. How does exceptionalism fail Narampa? What systems undermine Narampa's authority? Is it sexism, classism, or other forms of discrimination? And there's a glossary in the syllabus that provides definitions for all these terms. Yeah, Narampa gets ate up. Poor girl.
But you know, Narampa is all of us, really. I mean, I think we've all had a moment where we've had a reality check from the backfiring of assimilation, you know, especially as it relates to exceptionalism. So somewhere in all of our lives, we've come to believe that if we strive our hardest, if we work hard, if we, you know, whatever, that we're all going to get there, wherever there is, you know, and we make that up too. You know, and there's this, can I just say, there's like this meme. I have a favorite meme. There is a meme that I think captures this really well. And I know it sounds weird to say I found a deep meme, but it really is this profound meme. And it's a picture of a garlic clove with one piece taken out. And then in place of the missing garlic clove piece is a wedge of a mandarin orange. And the caption says, just because you fit doesn't mean you belong. Man, that's a deep meme.
I believe you. Does a mandarin orange slice really fit into a garlic clove? No, but I like the.
But it fits perfectly, right? And you feel that with Narampa, that it's like she has done everything she can, right? And she's even been acknowledged by her predecessor, her mentor. You know, she made it. And yet, like, her entire story is of her just being constantly undermined by other women in her organization. We've all experienced that. By even the elders who essentially accepted the recommendation of the former leader, right? So you have this adorable elder who's just like sort of like, yeah, I approve of you, but also, do you know what you're really doing, or is this really smart? And it's just this constant undermining, right? So it's just this lateral violence that she experiences amongst her peer group, where she's not really ever accepted, right? She has lightweight authority too, if you will. Like, technically, she is supposed to be the ultimate authority, but it's questioned like at every single step. And even her own security, like if it were not for Ihtan, she would have none of it.
And even they can't be trusted. Like, at the end of the day, they kind of, and you know, I was thinking about with Itan's character, it's like because they're presented as like cool, calm, secure, that you almost don't even understand that they are harming Narampa as well. Because of how they present, and you know, we make these assumptions that if someone has it together and they, you know, seem palatable and pleasant, that they can never be a threat. But people that desire to be palatable tend to be the ones that, you know, do the most harm, because you come to trust them. But because they're always on the fence about everything, they're always middle of the road, they're never going to cause conflict. They're also the first ones to throw you under the bus. And Ayatan's character threw Narampa under the bus.
Yeah. And you know, Iktan's relationship with Narampa is complicated anyway, right? And there's no, you're always hoping for some resolution so that, like, can I trust this person? Like, because I think she's being silly, but then you're like, but maybe she's not. They do have this relationship, and that probably means something more. Sort of like your best friend that keeps getting back together with their bad ex, and you're like, look, I want to like the person, okay? I want to, but they've sort of proven themselves to not be very trustworthy. But so going back to the quote, when Denouchi says this to Narampa, like, you feel it, right? You're like, ooh, that had to hurt. But at the same time, I mean, personally, I always feel like that's a moment of lift off your shoulders, because it's a moment where you realize, like, if this person is saying that, then they know how I feel, right? Even if they're meaning it in an evil way, or they're trying to, like, stick it to me, there's also, like, this moment of relief where you don't have to explain how hard it has been for you to do the things that you did, right? It's inherent in what they're saying, that they already know. Like, when he says that, especially as her brother, and as she learns everything that he's went through, like, I think that's what salvages their siblingship, is this reality that even though there have been, like, a decade that's passed and they've been separated by space and time and affinity and everything, that there's still that connection there, that they have shared lived experiences that might not be identical, but that have certainly wielded their weight in the pain that they've inflicted. And I feel like that moment also finally makes Narampa less annoying in her, like, her attempts to sort of be exceptional, and sort of have empathy for her. You're like, yeah, that, you're not Skymade, and you never will be, no matter how hard you try. I also think, from Haisan, who's the elder, to Abba, like, all of these characters, none of them are really even empathic towards her. Like, Ikhtan, you wonder, like, if that's just sort of like a
But it's kind of wild
fondness.
from Ikhtan, like, they all kind of feed into othering Narampa because of her class, right? Because she's from the Mao. So which would be sort of like a discrimination or racism, if you would say.
Yeah.
And nobody, and it's like she only had that one guardian, but even the elder that preceded her did not look out for her properly, because he just, was like a diversity hire, and then she was thrown to the wolves.
Well, there's no way to give a for this because the second book is out, but in one of the chapters, they actually, the opening statement is that, the announcement that her predecessor made of her.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder if they didn't see sort of the writing that was coming on the wall, and if maybe Narampa wasn't chosen specifically for the sacrifice in much the same way Serapio's mother knew that his coming
like
to
they
be
knew
was
the end was coming, so why not make her the sacrificial lamb?
Yeah, because they even say, like, while some of you might not agree or even understand, like,
That's insane.
this is intentional. So I sort of, like, we don't know what that really is, and maybe some of that will be clarified in book 2, but I feel like we might not know everything.
Yeah.
We might not know her whole story of coming to be.
I'll definitely be picking up book 2 because this was such a good read.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and we're trying to think of Narampa and Serapio as parallel characters. And so if that's true, then one also has to understand that perhaps part of Narampa's coming to be in parallel was also to always be a sacrifice.
But it's such a different kind of sacrifice, right? Is it a sacrifice it's never a sacrifice that Narampa will be comfortable with, because it wasn't a sacrifice for her own people, right? Like, Serapio,
but you have to wonder, I mean, for all of us who strive to assimilate or to fit in, we have this pathological quest that even if we know that, like, it might fail, that we still want to get there, right? We still want to be accepted. We still want to. So it may have been motivated by different things, nonetheless, you have to question whether or not, because Narampa could have chosen a different path, but she was also just as determined from the age to follow that through. And even with all of the roadblocks, even when she was told this is like impossible, you are absolutely never going to become one of them.
Yeah.
Still did everything within her power to defy those odds.
Poor child. Let's move on to Zyla, who's a lot more fun to talk about. Because we can't even talk about Narampa's her ending in this book, because that's the next part. But it's like, dang, girl, they got you good. So good. But on page 40 of the syllabus, the quote is from page 341. She had gotten used to Koya-Kola, where men seemed to hold most of the power. It was nice to be back on the side of the Crescent Sea, where women were often in charge. And this is Zayala speaking. How might the economic structure of Koya-Kola restrict the social mobility of women? And then the next question asks us to consider the numerous ways Zayala's health and safety is compromised by her proximity to the male characters. Does limited financial mobility or access, a struggle Zayala encounters throughout her narrative, endanger women in patriarchal systems? And this is rhetorical because yes. Yes.
Yes. You know, Shiala's character is interesting because I think one of the easiest things to accept is that even though she's a woman, that specifically because she's Teak and she has this magical power, that she has some defense, right? But even she recognizes that also because she's Teak, she's that much more vulnerable. And this is something that I really related to as an Indigenous woman, with the missing and murdered Indigenous crisis that's ongoing. Is, you know, like whenever I go out as well, even when I'm like in the middle of like nowhere in New Hampshire, which is where I am now, and I go out hiking, because of where I grew up and because of what I know about, you know, how Indigenous women are targeted, I am hyper vigilant to always like look around. And whenever I hear men's voice behind me coming up the trail, I totally pretend like I need some water or I got to tie my shoe, because I'm like, you are not sneaking up behind me, you know. And I wish I had a song, you know, I wish I had her song to be like, I'm now going to make you jump off this mountain, try to hurt me.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so with her, you know, she has this otherness that other women don't have. And so she does have more mobility, I think, because first she made a choice to leave Teak Islands, although we don't know her total backstory, because we get a sense as well that
He was kind of like kicked out.
yeah, she was sort of kicked out, and we don't know exactly why. But we also know that she's also pretty open about where, you know, wherever the wind takes her, and she's very agile and resilient. But you know, what's interesting about her characters, she's pretty well traveled, but a lot of the other women in the book aren't. Although there is one woman that I really wish we knew their backstory, the harbor master, when she gets to,
Oh, yeah. And that was an ancillary character. But I wonder if
yeah,
this became a
they
movie,
describe
if
her
that
with
character
orange
would
hair
become,
and black skin.
yeah, if that would become a
So
more
you know
prominent
she's from
character.
somewhere else because she doesn't look like any of the other characters, right? And she's the harbor master, and she's like a hard negotiator. And even though we like think Shala is a badass, right? The reality is this harbor master basically took her boat for a song and a dance. And this is a boat that like Shiala thought was going to be like her lifeline and her source of income. And so you get the sense that there is some mobility from that character, and also the other minor character that Serapio senses that she's interested in, that's from
I'm
the,
bad with names. I know who you're talking about when it's all on the pier, but
yeah. So she seems to have some mobility, but it's mostly based on the fact that her family owns this boat and does sort of this transportation service, right? But you get a sense that most other female people, that as they go up in their ranks, they sort of stay stationary and they become matriarchs in their community. They're not moving about. but so I think Xiala is an exception in terms of like mobility. And I wouldn't say that she gets around because she's economically able, right? I think she's economically motivated. Mm-hmm. And there is a distinction between those two things for sure.
You know, let's talk about the sex positivity of the Teak people. Page 43 of the syllabus. The quote is from 353. I fuck a lot. The Teak aren't uptight about such things, and it's something I enjoy. How does the structure of the Teak society lend itself towards a sex positive approach to casual relationships? I actually love this whole little setup because before this, we're getting like an explanation of where's. Am I saying her name incorrectly? Xiala?
Well, in the narration, they say Xiala.
So, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Xiala and like the maternalistic setup of the Teak people and how they still mate with men and then discard them and then kind of allude to her being removed from the community. But like this setup that they have, like they live a life, like they live, you know what I mean? Like they live. There's so much less strife because they are not tethered to men. Yeah.
They're not waiting for anyone to show up with an umbrella or, you know, fix their boat.
Highly aspirational. I would like to achieve said status.
I'll be your vice president. Call me Kamala.
No, you're not a cop. No carceral scene over here. No ops. No ops.
You know, what I loved about Xiala's commentary with Serapio is one, she sort of knows that she wields this sort of sexual authority, this power, but she doesn't really quite understand until later. Like he's like 5 years younger than her, and he's actually never been with anyone, right? So it's like she's wielding this huge like great sword, and meanwhile, you know, she's
have like light
character, and he's like level 10 with like armor, you know, like that. But you know, she holds the feminine sacred always. And I love that. I mean, I at least relate to that as an Indigenous woman. But the way she also says, you know, the Teak, we're not so uptight about these things. Even she recognizes in all of her meanderings. So she sort of spills the beans that, like, it's not just that she is open to a hookup. It's that she's basically saying, like, I've been there, I've done that, I've been around the block, and I can tell you, like, it's all right. Whatever it is, you know, whatever it is you're thinking about, like, I'm cool with it. And that's just, I'm old enough to say that when I was a teen, I was never around young women or anyone that was sex positive who didn't talk about sex or even our bodies with some sentiment of shame or at least like shyness and secrecy. And that's totally different now. Like now, you know, if someone would have said the things that I regularly hear now from women, which I'm like, yeah, yes, you would have been called a slut back when I was a teen. So her character is like really relatable for me because I'm like, yeah, not ashamed.
I think all the women and multiple people that read this book find Xiala to be a very empowering character because like she goes through all this strife, but then like she just has like these she kind of is the exceptional character in the book. Low key, you know. Yes. She's highly magical and also just kind of like that bitch.
But you know, it's like even with that, you sort of wouldn't want to be her, right? Like being like people say like we you know, people kill Teaks for their eyes. You know, like you wouldn't want to feel hunted. You wouldn't want like at any moment in time someone might want to cut off your finger or take off your eye or, you know, see you as like a sexual target. So it's like there's this, I think, I mean, for me, there's always that mix, right? And I think for a lot of women, it's like, how pretty do you want to be? There's a cost to that in our society. right? How accessible do you want to be? You know, because it's like people are like, oh, you're so friendly. And I'm like, I'm not that friendly. Like I have a, you know, like I have some sensibility about me as well. And
Yeah.
don't touch me. You know, like don't be familiar. Okay.
Don't cross that boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Shiala has that as well. And I think that, you know, that's where a lot of women are, is even when we are at our best,
I
not
don't know
feeling.
how many women will be like, the cost of beauty is not worth it. No, a lot of us would be like, yeah, to be, we still live in a we all, patriarchy has no gender. A lot of us would love to
But
be.
we won't ignore, what I'm saying is we wouldn't ignore, very much like Shiala, we won't ignore the cost of that. Right? We're not walking out in this, okay. I take it back. I'm walking back.
Yeah, because I'm like, a lot of people
Okay.
would ignore the cost of it and like get what they can get in the immediacy, the greed. People, I think Shiala's character is not greedy, right? They
No.
have a really strong moral grounding that kind of guides them, because they could be like, well, if I'm at this high of a risk and I don't get to control, there's a real high risk of me dying. Let me just live my best life and go out the best way I can.
She is
But she has a
attuned.
will to survive.
There are those of us, in particular women in communities of color, who are very much aware, and also members of the trans community, right? We're very much hyper aware of the type of attention that our appearance might put us in. Not because it's not just because you're pretty, you deserve this. It's just like we get that sort of attention. And I think for some people who are more affluent or in a more privileged space or who are white, we know from the statistics that they're far less likely to have violence committed against them. We know that they're far less likely to experience sexual assault or, you know, in their lifetimes. We know this from like the statistics, from lived histories, from stories from people in our families and our communities. And I think Shiala has that, right? She's Teak, and Teak are inherently, you know, sort of feared, but also preyed upon. And so I don't know. I don't know that she's the universal, like, ultimate diva character that anyone can relate to, because I think she's still a person of color living in a world where she is still a target. You know, she's vulnerable despite all of her power.
This is true. All right, we're gonna move on to the last thing we're talking about, because we are at time here. You're bringing all the depth, I have to like go ruminate on this. I have to think about this more. But on
I'm
page
gonna think too.
44 of the syllabus, there's several quotes from 360 and 363. So it's not only the institution you and my mother are after, it's the God itself, the very ordering of the world. Vengeance, then. But what is vengeance if not justice? Vengeance can be for spite. It can eat you up inside, take from you everything that makes you happy, makes you human. Look at what it did to your mother. Would justice do that? Is justice fueled by vengeance or desire based on perceived or real dehumanization on part of the oppressed? Is justice fueled by vengeance or desire based on perceived or real? I mean, oh man, it troubles you to actually think about what justice is, right? And I think there's a very thin line between justice and vengeance, because in order to survive as an oppressed people, the oppressor has to live within you. And so I think in any pursuit of justice, vengeance will show. But what do you do when that vengeance shows up?
Yeah. You know, I think this is like,
A hard question.
it's a hard question, because I think that to really be honest when you answer the question, you also have to acknowledge that we all have different ideas of what justice would look like.
Yes.
And we all have different inheritance of vengeance, right? Where we have different ways that we're aware of what happened to us as a race, as a gender, as a whatever, right? And the truth is, I don't want to use the word complacent, but I want to say a lot of us want to seek justice for things that, for wrongs that have been committed, but we might not be willing to take the risk to really see things made right, if you will. And when I say made right, like that depends on what's in your mind as what would be the right thing to do. And so I want to bring up the fact that like there is a different pursuit of vengeance. One is like that moment you have when someone has truly wronged you versus what you know society will say is an acceptable reaction. And we can pursue vengeance via very different ways, right? We can be passive aggressive and petty because we realize like we are going to be judged by society and perhaps even arrested. Like if we do what we know would be the true thing that we want to do. And I think that what this whole story gets at is that dilemma between what you know is like the true vengeance. This is the true reckoning of the wrongs that have been committed, and what you're willing to suffer from society, you know, and that backing off of or being creative. And you know, we've seen tons of examples throughout history where someone said, you know, Martin Luther King or other, you know, said there are other ways, right? And we know that there are always other ways, but sometimes you are so damn mad, right? Sometimes you are so hurt or you're so injured or you realize that the ramifications are going to last for generations. And so I think that dilemma, that choosing between the brand of vengeance, is it Coke or is it Coke Zero? And, you know, like I'm not a fan of aspartame or artificial sweeteners. But I also know that there's a cost when you choose to live in society. And I think that that's why I think this book is such a gift, because you feel like you're getting the full-blown version of what true justice would look like in Serapio's story. But we also know that like that is going to come at a huge cost, like to everyone, to the people who love him and who have come to love him, to the people who are going to die, you know, in order for that to happen. And I think that that's really the gift of this story, is that we get to see in this fictionalized world what real vengeance, what real justice would look like.
You said everything. I like there's nothing else for me to add. Like yes, heart emoji, brown heart emoji.
Is it pumping too?
Yeah, no, it is really, as I said earlier, what do we do when the vengeance shows up? Because vengeance is gonna show. And is it wrong that people that have been so heavily oppressed might just that the certain quadrant of them are just going to be after vengeance? Like when we think about the carrion crow, like there's going to be a certain amount of people that just want to get revenge for the family member they lost and who are not going to be invested in the labor of reconstructing society. So that's like, what do you do? Like, you
Well,
know,
and I think as a society, we're exhausted from the massive amount of people who choose to be complacent and indifferent, right? I mean, that's the majority, and that makes the lift harder for those who are willing to do the work, who are willing to suffer. And I think that's why we love Serapio so much, is that even though it is beyond his time and his personal knowledge, he's willing to carry it all on his shoulders. And that's, I mean, we see those people, right? And I hope that as people see those people, we recognize what they are giving and what that gift is. And also understand that, like, if we're not willing to step into those shoes, you know, we need to also reconcile with ourselves what that means. You know, like, what are we choosing if we're choosing not to?
I mean, yeah, we have this comment here that says vengeance could lead to the oppressed doing the same actions that their oppressors did. You have to draw the line somewhere. It is true, but I think maybe but this like everything still creates a hierarchy. Maybe my imagination is limited here because I just think vengeance is gonna show up, right? And at some point, you get so far into this radical movement, like into the like you get so far into it that you don't necessarily have time to stop, halt. Let's weed the vengeful people out at this moment, especially in this narrative where you have the convergence happening. It's like, all right, we just all got to be down for it, and then on the other side we have to be ready to work through the vengeance people have and not letting that overtake, because it's like, you have the radical moment of violence, but then you still have the new world that you have to imagine and reconstruct. So there's still a lot of work to do after the convergence happens.
Absolutely. And I'm going to try to bring this full circle because this reminds me. So Poage's character, the reason that I love Poage's character is because he has that moment, right? Where he says to Serapio that he's not sure if he even that if it's right for him to want his Serapio's love. He has this moment where he realizes, like, this has all come to fruition. I have now trained you. You've already had your other two teachers. And now I'm about to set you off into the world to go die. And you can tell that there's a part of him who now loves this human that he is set into motion on a path that will invariably achieve all of the goals that he and his, compatriots were aiming for. And that cost is dear to him. And he cries, and Serapio recognizes that, Poage is grieving, and he even questions Poage, like, are you crying? And Poage says, I've done a lot of wrong things, but don't I deserve to at least have this? And I think that that's where a lot of people are with, where we're trying to reconcile with what's happening in the world around us is, like, do we not deserve that moment where, like, we've been hurting for a long time and we do want vengeance, but we're also still in pain. And there's always, the reality is, when you seek vengeance, it's not like all of a sudden everything feels good, right? Like, that's not the end of the story. Like, the pain is still there. The generational trauma is still there.
This is all very true. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for pulling us to the book
This was
club.
so much fun.
It was so happy to have you here. It was so great. Thank you for putting us in touch with Adam. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm so happy I hit you up. I was like, have you read this book? You were like, no, girl. But you read it and you loved it.
This was like the best invitation because I feel like I needed this book. I needed the break time. And of course, like, I always love connecting with you. And now, now we both have this on our to-do list. So there's that.
All right, thank y'all for joining. As always, you can pick up the syllabus for Black Sun on smartbrowngirl.com/syllabus. You can follow Dr. Orton at TwoFeathers PhD on Instagram, where she posts all her outdoorsy, vacationy pics. And you know what? In Denver, it'll still be outdoorsy. Ooh,
That's true.
I
That's
can
true.
visit you in
Yeah,
Denver.
you just spilled some beans, but we're just gonna pretend like beans are part of, like,
My bad.
my cup of sparkling water.
I was excited because I was like, I can come visit you because there's a direct flight. But I will clip this part of the video out.
You can come visit me whether there's 4 connecting flights.
No. There's also extracurricular activities to be done in certain places,
Okay.
That's what we're on. All right, thank y'all for joining, and I will see you next week. We have Lael coming in, and then we have the author chat. So submit your questions to our Google form, okay? Deuces.
Oh, I'm excited. Then I can ask my book 2 questions.